We are back again with In the Stacks by the Sea in the Georgetown County Library System. I'm Dan Turner, and we have a wonderful poet, and I still call him young, though he's half a century old now, and a bit grizzled, a bit grayer. A silver fox with us. Adam Vines, all the way from the great state, or pretty good state of Alabama, visiting here in South Carolina. We'll ask him a bit about his feelings for South Carolina and connections to our great state, the Palmetto State. But Adam, highly accomplished poet, great voice of the contemporary South, and a lot of other things. Think of him as a Southern writer, but he's got quite a range. He's here with us today in celebration of April as National Poetry Month. So we're thrilled to have him. Author of 2 books of poetry himself, The Cold Life and Out of Speech, for us, but also in a very interesting collaboration with Alan G. He's co-authored 2 books of poetry as well, and you might say a word or two about that form of authorship. But thanks for being with us, Adam.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thanks for your title of the show, because I love double preposition titles. So.
Yes, and pretty much everything around here, you'll notice, has the preposition by the sea.
Yes.
So we're just kind of, and we have
By
stacks.
the log in the hole is going to be the title of my next collection, hopefully. If I could ever finish it.
Just give us some, some naming rights.
Yeah. I'll let you blurt it.
Yeah, and you have your new collection, I should say. You're already fast at work on another one, but Out of Speech. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean, out of speech?
Out of speech is a translation of ekphrasis, which is a Greek term that means out of speech, or out of, or phrasis, phrase, expression. So it's using language to express visual art.
Yeah. And this is, as I was saying, I think of you as a Southern writer. You've written a lot of poems in the Cold Life and elsewhere. You published some poems not collected in the Cold Life, but you poems about the outdoors, about hiking, about camping, about fishing, about your father was a bricklayer. You were a landscaper for 20 years before coming in.
Tripping into poetry.
Stumbling into poetry. Thank goodness for the rest of us. But so this is, that's I guess how I typically think of you in terms of those poems. But you've got quite an array. You just wrote an entire collection about paintings, about going to museums and kind of inhabiting the world of these paintings, and also looking around you at the other people looking at these paintings, and just using those as jumping off points for any number of thoughts and feelings drawn from these paintings. And there's so much more in your world of poetry. You just read a poem on the history of tampons, well researched.
Right.
It's not, you're certainly anything but one-dimensional as a poet. And this is a pretty remarkable collection. So,
thank you. Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it was a way for me to write a grant so that I could pile up a number of states that I'd been to. I wasn't really interested in the visual art or the museums that much, but I wanted to go to places that had like good Chinese food and a decent cab service. Even though I'd never called a cab, I thought it was important that I go to a place that had a lot of cabs. being a country boy.
Yeah.
That's what Daddy always said. He said, go to places that have cabs. So that's where I went.
And that's how you wound up in
That's
Buenos
where I
Aires.
found up in Philadelphia, and then in Philadelphia they had a beer tent outside. So I went up to the beer tent in the beer garden, and they were serving free samples, and decided to go inside. And then after that I started writing poems about paintings.
They had a museum in Philadelphia.
Kind of, yeah. I think that's what they call them, the thing where the houses are.
Okay.
Yeah, but I walked in. No, really. I grew up loving art. I was very lucky. My mother was a woman who came to Birmingham, Alabama from Chicago to go to a little suitcase college called Howard University that should then change to Sanford University. She was walking down the hill on the 4th of July to get, of all things, tampons. When everyone was gone, she was a 16-year-old girl back then. She finished high school early. And she was walking down the hill, and my father was sitting on the porch with his shirt off and a cowboy hat on. He had just gotten through laying some brick. And she said, I heard from the side this man say, "You need a ride?" She said, I looked over at that man. I'd never seen anything like that, even in the movies. How could I say no? So then I spawned from that weird, connection.
If they'd had better cab service. You
Better
would
cab
never
service, she
been around.
never would have met him.
Yeah.
Right, no, never would have met him. But the reason that I brought that up is she's from Chicago, and I would spend some summers in Chicago, and I had a great aunt who loved visual art and would take me to the Chicago Art Institute, and she would talk about art, and she would ask my opinion about art. I never had the opportunity to look at art, even in magazines or books or the coffee table books, and it made me feel like I had a voice and I was important. After that, I started sketching and drawing and then stretching canvases. So I painted quite a bit, I drew quite a bit, but then when I started my company at 18, I had to make some really hard decisions. I was working 50 hours a week, I was going to school part-time, so I kind of focused on the school and the work. And then later on, when I did pick up poetry, that replaced painting for then. And as I lucked up and somehow got a job in academia, which I still am not sure how all that happened, I decided I was going to try to marry my two loves, which was painting and writing creatively. So I wrote a grant, received a really large grant, and was able to go to places like Philadelphia, Chicago. I was in New York for 10 days. And I wasn't kidding about the cab thing. When I was in New York, I tried to hail my first cab of my life, and I didn't understand what the little lights on top meant, the light bar. And after trying to hail about 7 or 8, and they just kept cruising by, I thought, they know I'm a country boy, and they're going to mess with me. They're not going to stop. So I walked 85 blocks that day. I'm not kidding. And it was the very best thing that ever could have happened to me. Very best thing. I mean, hearing 4 or 5 different languages on the street corners, ducking into the coffee shops. I was scared of the big city. There was a reason that I'd never gone to a big city on my own. The public transportation scared me. All the people scared me. I didn't know how to navigate a city like that. But after I left, I wish that I would have forced myself to have gone to a school in the big city, or that I didn't have to, even though working as a landscaper and the blue-collar work informs my poetry, it informs who I am. It would have been nice to get away for a few years in a big city. It's too late now. But. So yeah, I started writing these poems. Also, when I started writing them, I decided I was going to stretch the canvas around everything. The people in the museum, I was going to allow my subjective renderings to come in. I was going to allow everything from the docent to the patrons, to the dog outside, to the albino squirrel that I saw eating a cheese Danish outside the Washington Gallery, to the Samoyed that was hooked up with this thin leash, and then this boy who comes by and he's hooked up in a strap too, and his mom is trying to hold him back. All of those, all of those wonderful images that we carry in our memory, and then our imagination starts shaping how we remember it, and it is a bit of a muddling, a bit of a change of juxtaposition. So things that happen outside can happen inside. Someone can walk up a stairwell and then walk into a painting in some of my poems.
Yeah.
So that was the approach I wanted to take, and somehow I wasn't writing toward a collection. I just knew I wanted to write poems, and as happens sometimes, I wrote enough and was fortunate enough for an editor to like them.
Yeah, and LSU Press is one of the top poetry presses around, so
Yeah, I'm very lucky.
it's
Yeah.
a nice landing spot for sure. And you know, I was joking a little bit with the history of tampons poem, but you can take that and make it into a not just a credible poem, but a smart and funny and kind of tender poem about you know, coming of age sort of poem, and that's quite a skill, you know, not to make a mess out of a poetic subject like that. Toilet Flowers is the name of that poem you read for us.
I grew up in a very small house, you know, one bath, 2 bedroom. And when my brothers were in town, at any one time we might have 4 brothers vying for a bathroom in the morning. And my bricklaying daddy.
4 sisters.
There you go.
And
Right, so we would have 1 at the sink, 1 on the pot, and 2 in the bathtub, you know, and all throwing soap and toothbrushes at each other. And my mother sitting there going, when are they going to leave? What are they going to do? Well, I remember going into that bathroom one morning and looking down, because it was just a toilet, there was no vanity. Toilet, and then right next to it, my mother, and a sink over here, pedestal sink with nothing below. Over here is where my mother kept her feminine products. And I remember looking down into that beautiful blue box and seeing these things sticking up like Lincoln logs and imagining that they were toys. So one morning I opened one up and it changed my life. Toilet Flowers. You can imagine where this is going. And I probably know more about the history of tampons than any living human. Did about 2 months of research on tampons. And you're about to hear. So now I'll bestow the knowledge.
good thing I have a feminine audience.
Yes. Toilet Flowers. See how much you knew about
We'll be
this.
lost.
See how much you knew about this.
Taking notes.
Egyptian women tied papyrus fibers into Isis knots, damming the moon blood, the open wound from Thoth. And farther east, girls watched their mothers wrapping theirs out of the same thin paper from which they folded swans. And later, a man designed the catamenial monthly device, and a man called it Tampion, a plug for a cannon, keeping out dust and moisture. Only a man would come up with Tampion, a plug for a cannon. What's wrong with men? My high school girlfriend called it George. She'd say, George is in town this week, when I walked my fingers up her thigh. But at 10, I knew none of this. They sat in an open box next to the toilet I shared with my 3 brothers, father, and mother. They didn't come with mother's warnings or reprimands like, don't sword fight with a plunger, blank will kill you, blank will make you go blind. I knew they were for her, all else was a mystery. So one Sunday morning, while my family still slept, I latched the bathroom door, peeled back the wrapper as if it were a popsicle, and held the plunger, a cannon, a gun barrel. I pulled on the string, holding the pledget like a mouse by its tail. I smelled it, pressed my thumbnail into its soft density, placed it on the sconce like a candle. Pretending to light it, I threw it into the tub like an M80. Imagine Gabriel or Michael lighting the fuse with the red punk of their pupils, then tossing the pure white scourge at Satan. Open another, then 3, 4, more and more, holding them in the corner of my mouth while squinting one eye like my father chewing his cigar, tucking them like grenades into the waistband of my skivvies. One fell into the toilet, slowly opened like a moonflower, burgeoning to life the way I imagine the sea monkeys and ads on the back cover of my comics would. I dropped all of them in, one by one, watching as they bloomed in the bowl. My mother's footsteps, her voice behind the door, and I flushed them. The water rose, spilling over the porcelain lip, and when I faced my mother, the bathroom now flooded. I felt shame for her secret I thought I now knew, for the beauty I had created and the sin of creating it. Adama, Adam, me, bloody lone.
But you do have an incredible range, and I'd like to ask you to kind of take us through one poem that you didn't say a whole lot about the origins of. You gave us some hints of other poems that you read today, but tell me a story. Your great evocative poem, but you have a brilliant talent for elegies, and you have this, I guess, Orpheus, this mythic figure, has that Orphic task of drawing the other out of the darkness, and never fully complete, never comes back to life. But you really take on that mantle of the Orphic responsibility, I think, a lot in your poetry, and in incredible ways. And that seems to be one of those poems where you can take the mythic and make it into a meaningful elegy. The mythic, but also the real. Could you tell us about that poem?
When I was young, I started reading a lot of mythology. I was telling one of the audience members that I'd read every book on mythology, whether it was Norse, Egyptian, Sumerian, Greek. By the time I was 10 or 11 years old, my mother used to take me to the library every day, and I was in these book clubs, like I'm sure you have here. And there was a huge stress on me reading. And I loved comic books too. And in addition to that, I was raised kind of the strict Calvinist, so there's always this Old Testament looming around too, which you'll see in a number of my poems. There's not a whole lot of the New Covenant. There's a lot of covering yourself with ashes and dust, and it probably has to do with my coal mining background too, and putting my hands in the soil and feeling insignificant and understanding the deterioration more than the elevation. So this poem started out as just a playful poem about myth. The Moor who moored his boat at the moor. It was just wordplay, which so many poems come out of wordplay like that. And it could have been a kind of ridiculous Lewis Carroll poem. And I think it starts out that way, but that's how language kind of starts out as well. If you look at Portrait of an Artist, in the beginning of Portrait of an Artist, when James Joyce has the baby tuckahoo and all this kind of ridiculousness that comes out and then starts forming into that artist. Of course, I would have ruined the poem if I would have thought, oh, I'm going to write like James Joyce here, and I'm going to write like this. But I think it was just the playful nature of fable, the playful nature of things turning into bears and back and forth, and what I knew about Native American mythology. And it slowly turned into an elegy for my father that I wasn't expecting. In the very end, the bricklayer in that poem, and he goes up through the gates and he starts laying brick up in heaven. That's in his trowel that turns into a crappie. He was a fisherman too, and he loved to crappie fish. These things came without me directing them. The mother who planted the pool cue in the ochre, loam of her childhood creek, and the sobering blooms of that blue chalk at the tip. My father was a fantastic pool player. He was a one-pocket player, and he was a hustler, and he would hustle at night. People would call him from the pool halls, and they'd say, we got some locals in here, we got a whale in here, come on in. And they'd take a cut, they'd take some sugar off the top when he would go in. He also had a steak horse who would come in and stake him on a 60-40 steak. I've got a poem in the coal life called The Steak Horse. Believe it or not, my father took me to world 9-ball tournaments and 8-ball tournaments, and he wouldn't play in them, but he would play with the pros in the back rooms, because that's where they really made their money. Back then, the purse was only $1,000, $1,500. Wasn't a lot of sponsorship around, so it was an excuse for the best pool players in the world and the best hustlers to play until 10 o'clock the next morning. Well, my dad would take me, and I would run drinks and cigs for his stake horse, Mapo from Houston, who was an old oil tycoon. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that out loud. But I can remember one night I was in there and Mapo comes in, he's got his shirt undone, he's got this big gold medallion here, he's got these two women on either arms in sequins, you know, and he looked like this Hindu god, and I was right in the middle of reading Hindu, you know, mythology, and I was like, my God, and he's like, go get me some cigs, boy, and a whiskey. I said, okay, my dad said, yeah, you go do that, go do that. So they had this little bar set up, and he had his bulldog next to him, had a duffel full of money. And his bulldog reached in his pocket, enormous man. And I remember him licking his thumb and peeling off a 20 and giving it to me. And when I bring this drink and the cigs back, and back then they probably didn't cost but $5 for both, I guess. He'd say, keep the change. And I remember after that night I was able to buy a BMX bicycle.
Oh, nice.
Something that, you know, poor country, but I never could have bought, you know, on my own. Well, anyway, those are all memories of mine that were placed within particular myths, with the brother, the mother, and then the father, and then the shift is to the child who puts on the tinfoil wings, which I used to do. And I used to grab my father's brick hammer like Thor, and I used to descend into the basement of my grandfather's basement, which was kind of scary because it had this big hole that had been cut out in it too, and I never knew what was in that hole. But I thought, there's Fafnir the dragon in there or something. There's something in there, you know. So I went back to that and then thought of this boy descending into the basement trying to find his father, where the burning bush, when myth becomes just empiricism, the burning bush is just burning brush, and the rainbow bridge is just the long frown of the morning storm. You know, it's just a rainbow, just merely something that provoked myth, but has no underpinnings to truth. The title came later. Tell Me a Story is, I just stole a Robert Penn Warren title because I love the poem, and I thought that it helped inform it, but yet it wasn't so heavy-handed. I think that people are always going to know that, and I didn't want to directly give it an attribution either. I just, maybe I would need to now. People are so funny about that now, but you know, it is what it is, and it's about storytelling in the South and myth. Vineses are known for being storytellers, even if we don't write poetry till later on in life. We like to sit around on old tractor tires. I can remember the old homestead, and looking in the old homestead barn where we used to roast a big pig before Easter. One year, we were out running around the fields. All the kids would camp out in the fields in tents, and we would look in that barn while they're drinking beer and flicking cigarettes out the barn door and got the spit going. And I saw this kind of extraordinary hierarchy of like the older relatives down to like my father around, you know, sitting on an old car seat, all the way down to an old 5-gallon sheetrock bucket. And I sat there at that door and listened to them tell stories, and that's probably my first introduction to hearing great storytelling. I was hearing my uncles talk while they're drinking beer. And you know what they did that night, though? They fell asleep. Fire went out, the pig spoiled. So we all had to get money together the next day and buy Church's chicken. Tell me a story. Father, tell me about the Moor who moored his boat in a moor, how he ate petrified alligator toes and hid his prayers in snail shells, how he turned into a bear, refused to hunt, spent his days licking the shadows of crows that stretched before him. Brother, tell me the one about the woman who planted her husband's pool cue in the ochre loam of her childhood creek, the smooth ash nodding into dogwood, the blue tips and sobering blooms. Tell me about the woman at the dump, her eyes large and dark as a mule's, how she enters our dreams when she gathers our junk. Mother, tell me about the bricklayer who was taken away to rebuild the city of God, how he didn't need a plumb line to lay the golden courses, how his trowel turned into a crappie when he was done. At this time, let me finish. His son mixed what he'd learned in Sunday school and comic books to try to make sense of it all. Wished he were Thor, winged crown of tinfoil on his head, his father's brick hammer dangling from a belt loop. How he descended into the underworld of the basement to find his father after the burning bush was just burning brush, and the rainbow bridge was merely the long frown of the morning storm.
Yeah, I mean, you clearly have this sort of glorious penchant for storytelling. Why?
And bullshit. I mean, some of it's just bullshit,
yes.
But I mean, that is
out.
storytelling.
Not allowed to, this is the library, public library, not allowed to say those things, Adam Vines. But but why not short stories? Why poetry? How does this work in poetry so effectively?
I've tried to write prose. I've written some short stories, and when I look back to, I wrote a short story called "The Quality of Light in Walker County," and I told you about the pig spoiling. It's kind of about that. It's about this kid who walks around and he's seeing his cousins fight over in the corner, and he's seeing the mother and some women in the kitchen talking about the sexual inadequacies of their husbands, and he's looking in the barn door and seeing the patriarchy descending down there and getting drunk, and then the fire goes out and the pig spoils, and yeah, I mean, I'm a
But you can get it. You get the details. You can tell the story, and it's there in the poems, and it works. And there's something that's memorable and portable.
When I look back to that short story, I see 25 poems, and I knew then.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember who it was, but there was a poet that I saw when I was in my early 20s. It was before I was even writing poetry, and he came to UAB. And he said, I started out as a novelist and I realized I was not in it for the long haul. And I'm not in it for the long haul. I mean, I told you earlier that I have a relative who wrote about the river, has 2 novels from Little Brown, and all of the reviews that were written about his novels said that he uses extraordinary language. He has captured the argot of river culture. However, he knows nothing about plot. Plot bores the hell out of me. I like these splices of life. I like these moments in time, much like a painting where Andrew Wyeth described his paintings as frozen motion. And I think that we can have these wonderful little splices that are little moments in time, and they'll always be that, but they're also give us a hint to what happened before and what happens after. We don't need a full beginning and end. And they're always kind of shaking, vibrating, reverberating as we read through them, and then the subtext is shaking.
Yeah.
And then it bubbles to the top. And that's what I'm interested in, is creating as much subtext that can come out, and layering as much as I can with as little language as possible.
Yeah.
Simplicity. And that's me with my shovel in the backyard digging a hole.
That's it. And I think your poems, if you haven't gotten that sense, and we'll put his Adam's reading up online at the Georgetown County Library site on the YouTube channel, and we'll have that available so you can see that sense of the poem resounding with their stories just sort of bursting out of it. You can see that through the imagery and the out-of-speech poems. You can feel the imagery just sort of shaking through. So it's something.
That's what I'm hoping, when we were talking about this, being contained, the vibrating narrative. I think that I was thinking about that when it came to the painting too, that how can this frame contain all of the life?
It's like a crucial.
All of the beauty that's happening in this painting. You almost want to take it off and stretch it out over everything. So that's what was kind of wonderful when I read at the Columbia Museum a couple of months ago, and I was reading in front of that 20-foot Pollock mural that Peggy Guggenheim commissioned. And then I felt like, okay, now that's the kind of stretching I want to happen with some of these little tiny Hopper paintings, for instance.
Well, we've got to shut it down for now.
No, let's not do such a thing. Let's get lunch. Let's sit here. Let's get a bottle, and let's have some fun.
Keep it going.
Keep it going.
But we'll keep it going.
Tie some fishing knots. I can show you how to tie a blood knot. I can
See.
yeah, double clinch.
And you've been out on the river, and we'll talk about that some other time. You'll come back and talk
Yes.
about the river and your connection with South Carolina. You love this landscape, and maybe you'll come here sometime. Although you're a native Alabaman to the core. But what do you say when you we didn't get to talk much about LNG and your collaborations, which are pretty amazing. You write one line and you trade off back and forth. There are 2 lines, right?
2 lines.
Back
yeah.
and forth, and yet these poems just cohere amazingly. But when you're done and you trade off, you say
Cooked.
cooked. So I think we'll
End with cooked.
end with cooked
Yes.
today. With
Or perhaps overcooked.
overcooked today.
Yes.
But thanks.
Like my mother-in-law's dusty pork chops she serves on Sundays. You can wring them out and they'll you get dust all over you.
That's how we will
Yeah.
end this
There's
episode.
no liquid left in swine when my mother-in-law gets to a chop. Never.
We're going to put that up for the world to see and
Good.
hear. And
She'll
send
never
it to
feed
your,
me again then.
to your
And
mother.
that might be a good thing.
Yes.
It might make for an awkward after sermon meal, but I can eat bread. I can eat crawf, Dad. I can eat stone.
You can eat beans, a bowl of beans. You can cook it yourself.
Old stomp.
So that is it. In the stacks by the sea,
Thank you.
under laws.
Expired.